for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM. Welcome to another episode of Agile.FM, and today I have a real treat on my show. It's Gerald M. Weinberg, Jerry Weinberg. He doesn't really need an introduction, but just for some audience who might not be familiar with his work, he won several awards. For example, the Warner Prize, the Stevens Award. He's also a charter member of the Computing Hall of Fame in San Diego. Jerry wrote more than 40 books and over 400 articles. Some of my favorites, if I could just point them out, is the Fieldstone Method, Exploring Requirements, and Are Your Lights On? He's an authority on management, requirements, problem solving, and those other topics. Some of those topics I'd love to explore with him, but first and foremost, welcome to the podcast, Jerry.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So what I would like to talk about is maybe just if we're segmenting the conversation a little bit, we have management. Maybe talk a little bit about management. You have a blog going. It's the secret of consulting.blogspot.com, and there are some of the rookie mistakes on one of your most recent posts there, and some of the rookie mistakes written by somebody else, but you basically summarized those, that you had one of the rookie mistakes, and that was micromanaging.
Yes, I mean, that's an ailment that pervades our industry. And one of the problems arises from the idea that you want to have someone be a manager of programmers, they ought to be a programmer themselves. This question has been asked for me for 50 years or more. And in a general way, I don't think it's required. But what's required is that the manager let the programmers program and allow them to do their work, their professionally trained work. And sometimes when you pick your best programmer and you make them a manager or team leader, they're prone to micromanaging. And especially if an organization is just starting out something new, like Agile for them is new, and you've got a manager who maybe was a programmer, but before they were ever doing Agile, they don't understand. They think the old way, and they're constantly saying things like, well, in the old days we used to do this, and you ought to do it this way and that way. And it tends to destroy the whole idea of what you're doing.
That's right.
So you have to be aware of that. And it requires a special kind of person to be able to let people, for example, if you're starting out with Agile, you're going to make some mistakes. You know what some of those mistakes are. And you got to let them make the mistakes and not just jump in and say, well, I knew we shouldn't have done that, and blah, 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 and here's how the old timers used to do it. So that's to me, the number one mistake managers make.
Right. So micromanagement is in our industry, obviously from an agile perspective, self-organization are one of the topics that are being pushed, obviously, as a leadership management style. However, you started your career in the 1950s with IBM, right? So way back, and you summarized this as like micromanagement as one of your mistakes, or the mistake in the industry, maybe. Why do you think it is that still today so many managers, so many people are still falling into this trap and not listening to advice we have gathered, such as yours, over all these years?
Well, I think the question is even deeper than our industry. I don't know if you have children.
I do.
You have kids?
Yes, I do.
How old are your kids?
8.
8-year-old? Yeah. Well, do you ever manage your child?
Say it again?
Manage your child, your 8-year-old? I mean, you see parents do that all the time. You don't want them to get hurt. Right? You don't want them to make a big mistake in their lives. And so you step in and try to micromanage them. And we grew up like that. And so I think it's a very common thing, not just in our software business, but everywhere. Right? Now, one of the reasons choosing leaders and managers, I like to have people who have grown children.
Yeah.
So no, we're kind of a young business, but if you have grown children, or in my case, grown grandchildren, hopefully you've learned not to micromanage by then.
Yeah.
Because you see it doesn't work. It only backfires on you all the time. So I think one of the reasons we get so much micromanagement is we have a lot of young team leaders, a lot of young managers who don't have children. I had a client once, I won't tell you who it was, it's a big software company, that some of their projects failed and some succeeded, and they couldn't figure out why. And so they asked me to come in and advise them about that. So I said, give me your successful project managers to talk to, and let's see what they have in common. Well, there were 4 projects, there were 4 managers, and they were all middle-aged women. They'd all raised, I said, how do you succeed in managing? And they said, well, it turned out they said, we've all raised teenage boys. We just treat our people the way we, because they're all teenage boys.
Right.
And we learn, not to micromanage them, and so on, how to handle them.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lack of experience in managing, leading people generally that leads to this.
Well, I think there's the term out there, the helicopter parents, right? So the ones that are basically like in helicopter over their kids and micromanage them.
Yeah. Well, you have always the problem because if you get far away, you don't know what's going on. You need to do. And if you get too close, then you're micromanaging. So it's a matter of getting where you have perspective and then knowing you have to let people make mistakes. One of the things we do, we're starting out, for example, I see this over and over again, starting a new technique, maybe a new tool, maybe Agile itself is a whole new process or some part of it. And the manager will say, well, if this is so great, because they've been sold, somebody that's really, if this is so great, I've got this project that's a disaster. Right? It's this worst project we ever had, so we're going to start this new thing on this project is to rescue it. Okay, well, that's the worst possible thing to do. Because they're learning. Right? You start something new, riding a bicycle, programming a new language, using a new development environment, whatever. You need to make some mistakes to learn. Everybody makes mistakes.
Of course, of course.
But if it's the most important project and it's as big as it, you don't know. If they don't succeed, you don't know if it's because of the project or in fact what they were doing. So you give them a project, hopefully that's not too important. If they make a mistake, they screw it up, okay, chalk it up to learn. So that's one big mistake.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I want to touch maybe on another topic, and I got exposed to your literature, to your writing, especially on requirements, and that's how I started. Me personally got an entrance into your work, and that was the Exploring Requirements book, which came out, I believe, in the 1990s. Now, with the Agile Manifesto of 2001, an industry that has significantly shifted to iterative, incremental, and agile development practices, are there any things you would highlight out of your book, out of that requirements book? Because there's a drastic change in how requirements are being captured these days than they were in the past. Do you think there is any advice from your end where you feel like that is an important thing about requirements in the agile world? And maybe anything you feel like got better, maybe some things that got worse?
Okay, well, one of the things that definitely got better for a lot of people was learning to do requirements incrementally.
Mm-hmm.
Build a little bit and see how it is, get some function, get some interaction with people. And one of the reasons it's been good when they do that is the obvious one, that if you try to do a waterfall, let's say, where we get all the requirements at the beginning, and then we build it, no changes, nothing. Well, it doesn't work. That's the only thing wrong with it. It's a wonderful idea. If it worked, it would be great.
It would be great, yeah, it would be great.
Being able to teleport from one place to another would be a great idea. We could meet together in New York, and I just hit a button, and I'd be there, and we could talk. That's a great idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know how to do it, right? And the same way, in general, we don't know how to do all the requirements up front. And also, in general, we don't know how to do requirements. Now, one of the mistakes, I think, that some people have made in Agile is I forget what the original term was, but I call having a customer surrogate, one person who represents the requirements. They tell you what the customers want. So, well, that, again, kind of reproduces the same old mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because if this one person has a blind spot somewhere, then it has a blind spot there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the kind of projects these days, it's unlikely the person to know it and they need help. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you have iterative development where the Agile team, the developers, are in contact with the customers who are going to be customers of the users of their product, they can also be doing, in their minds, requirements. Now, it doesn't mean you don't want to have everybody putting in stuff just because they had an idea. I had a client where we found that they would get huge, irrelevant requirements because the programmers would go to a user conference and they'd have a little conversation with someone and said, wouldn't it be nice if we did this? And they'd put it in without telling anybody. Mm-hmm. And then somebody else would get another one. So it's got to, I think the job of that surrogate is to control the flow of requirements, but everybody needs to be gathering, listening all the time. And the book is really about how you do that. And how you listen, what kind of questions you ask, how you test the answers, so on. And not just talking to people, but also participating, sitting down with the people while they're trying to use maybe the predecessor system or do the job that they're doing, and so on. Getting involved. And if some people I see go to Agile, one of the Agile approaches, and I think it's a way, well, we don't have to have our developers meet our customers at all. Mm-hmm. We can keep them isolated, and then they won't be bothered. Well, that's not the point.
Yeah.
Okay. Not the point.
Yeah, so there were also other techniques in your book, like, for example, the global requirements, right? So there's a lot of deficits I see when I work with teams around that topic, right? There's a lot of functionalities being described, but not system-wide requirements. So there's definitely something in that book that is beneficial for current work. What do you think about other techniques? I think that came up a little bit after your book, in this case, use cases and user stories. Do you have an opinion about those?
They're not the be-all and end-all. And some people, that's just a mistake that people make. They think, but it's another technique. Anything you can do is fine.
Right.
And that's helpful, can be helpful, but if you start believing that we have one technique that solves all our problems, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, not there's no one size fits all. When you started writing about requirements, when you started working, there was a very different technology in place. There was, mainframes and so forth. And then towards the 2000s, the technology has significantly changed. Would you consider anything to be done right now differently in the current landscape, considering that the technology has changed so drastically? Would you do anything different in a requirements approach these days? Or would you think the old processes, the old ideas are still...
Well, the book is not really technology dependent.
That's right.
The techniques we have there. We didn't just start writing that, the day of 2 days before the book came out. We've been learning that for years.
Yeah.
And we haven't found, so far, we're in touch with a lot of readers. We haven't found anything in the book that's not relevant still.
Yes, okay. And I just want to ask questions from an agile perspective. I myself use the book as is today as I was using it 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So there is the depth and also the independence of any kind of technologies, right? But we do see teams that capture, let's say, requirements in electronic tools these days, very different than we used to. I mean, I used to document things in Word documents and so forth, and that has drastically changed to very collaborative tools these days, online and cloud-based and so forth.
Right. Well, they're called collaborative, but they're potentially collaborative. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that the people actually collaborate when they're using them. And it's often a way of keeping the people apart.
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the things you have in larger projects is you'll get arguments between one group and another group, how things should be defined, who should do this, who should do that. And one of the ways that managers have tended to deal with that is to use technology to keep the people separated so they don't have to deal with anger and stuff like that, which is, just poor management. They don't know how to deal with that stuff. But I have to say that when we started in the business, one thing, it was quite different. There's the kind of things we often made the mistake of relying on one person to tell us what the requirements were and just listening to what they said. So over the years, we developed these techniques for extracting information, which is what you want. And it's tough because you're really talking about the future. In other words, you're building a system that's going to be used tomorrow, not yesterday.
Right.
And so if something changes, you try to anticipate what might change so that your system will be useful in the future. And one of the, I guess it's a deep mistake that people make in doing requirements is they act as if they know the future. And nobody knows the future.
Yeah, that's the flaw, right?
So you build the system, and part of the requirement has to be the system be flexible enough so that something that you don't know is coming, you can deal with. Well, who knows how to do that? I mean, that's hard. But the way we build stuff sometimes doesn't take that into account because we might have a customer representative who's very sure of this and that. I had an example 2 days ago. We have a new bank, and we just got everything transferred to, or in the process of transfer, and I get a letter from them and say they decided to change the name of the bank. Well, who knew they were going to change the name of the bank? Right. And along with that, they changed the bank routing number and our account number. Okay. Now think of all the changes that might have to be made to code in their system and in our systems and in millions of customer systems. And there was no questioning us about it, whether we wanted to do this or what would be involved. And they made some assumptions about what would make the change easier on us.
Right.
Well, not all their assumptions were correct. and I'm still struggling with this. So I don't know, maybe there's a certain humility. Edgar Dijkstra once wrote an article about the humble programmer, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And if you have now with Agile, I've noticed that there's a little less chance that you will be too arrogant as a team, because one member might think he knows the future, but it's more likely that somebody will say, "Well, Jack, what happens if so and so? What happens?" And they're a little more humble. Doesn't always happen, because sometimes your Agile team is not really running as a bunch of equal collaborators, but one person dominating the others and just ordering them around and so on. And that's not what the intention was.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So especially in the innovative space, right? The more important it is when you're building really innovative solutions to stay humble and not trying to aim to think that you know the future. Let's talk about something else. One of my favorites is the Are Your Lights On? What a classic book about problem solving and how you approach problems, right? And even the title of the book in the beginning, it's just fantastic. If you see the title, you don't know what you expect, but then once you go through the metaphor in the book, and then everything comes together in a way that you will never forget the title of the book. You're setting a very nice tone in terms of problem solving here, and you evaluate issues, how to evaluate issues in general. The days in 2018, when we're recording this, are very hectic. People don't seem to have a lot of time these days anymore. Very fast decisions they're making. And when somebody reads through this particular book, which I love, and I always remind myself to go and read a few pages of that, sets the tone. It's also calm, right? And so how do you think this impacts today's decision making, this high speed and very fast approach and quick problem solving? And in this book, Are Your Lights On, goes really like behind the scenes. Yeah.
Well, okay, first of all, as you'll see in all my books, language I find is very important. And when you say quick problem solving, no, what you're really saying is quick attempts to solve problems.
Right.
Doesn't mean you solve them.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's like the magic button, right? I mean, oh yeah, well, let's give us a button that says solve problems. We get a problem, we don't even know what the problem is.
That's
Hit
right.
this button and it's solved. Right?
Solve, right.
Well, the only button like that is the suicide button. I mean, if you're dead, you don't have any problems anymore. As far as if you're going to stay alive and live with the system you're building, you've got to really solve the problems, not some superficial gloss. And one of the problems is management, who tends to reward activity versus actual solutions. And we see a lot of movement. Somebody tells me he's got a great programmer. I know he's great because he's always works after midnight. And he's always saying, why is he working after midnight? Because he's a crappy programmer, and he keeps making mistakes, and he has to keep fixing them. So if you have that kind of view, you're not going to get anywhere. The whole idea, really, I guess, the Are Your Lights On is a requirements book in the sense that one of the things that guides us is when we write requirements, we want the requirements to be in terms of what problems you're trying to solve, not solution ideas. In other words, at the requirements level, you're not telling the programmers how to do this, but what they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Okay. So if they don't write the requirements in terms of what is the problem we're trying to solve, in a definition, we have a way of defining what is a problem. If they don't have that form, then they're not usable. you can't test whether they've actually done it or not, right?
Mm.
We talk a lot about test first stuff and getting testers involved early. Well, if you have requirements that say the system ought to be fast,
Yeah.
what the hell are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
How fast is fast?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what is the problem you're trying to solve with the speed? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a chance of getting a good development that solves the problem, rather than just to claim, oh yeah, this is fast.
Yeah. And maybe not everything has to be fast. Maybe only a few pieces of.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the thorough asking, the techniques you're using, right? Self-organization, we touched on earlier in agile teams, is the preferred way of for teams to work autonomously. How would problem solving fit into that if we're working as a team?
Well, first of all, I totally believe in self-organization of technical teams, but I don't believe that just putting a bunch of people together in a room and saying, okay, organize yourselves, is going to work. It's just like selling a surgeon. A person who said, well, you want to go to medical school, you don't need all that. Just take this knife and cut open the person's head and remove the bad stuff. I mean, it requires a lot of interpersonal skills to be self-organizing effectively. And we tend not to, first of all, choose people who are any good at that. We choose them on the basis of technical ability. And often, like me, when I started many years ago, I went into computing so I wouldn't have to deal with people because I didn't understand anything about people and how to get along and how to compromise or not compromise or whatever. And so we're starting with a group of people who are often chosen with no particular ability to work with other people. And we throw them together and say self-organize. That's not a very effective way to do things.
Right.
People need some training. That's what we've done. You know Esther, she's now teaching the problem-solving leadership. See, leadership it's not about bossship. It's not about, right?
Yeah.
It's not how to be a slave driver or whatever, or how to inspire people, or it's how to work with other people. Take the lead in this self-organizing. And self-organizing, one way to look at it is, some people say, well, there's no leader. No, it's where everybody is a leader. At each given moment, there's some new kind of lead that's needed. Sometimes you need a little cheering up of people. Sometimes you need a new idea. It's what leads. Right? Sometimes just getting everybody to slow down and relax is what the kind of leadership you need. And so many leadership acts, and some people are good at one, some are good at another. So if you have a self-organizing team, the leadership moves around from person to person as they work, as the job requires. And we haven't really, other than our work and other people, have not really put that in as an essential part of the training for Agile. We just say self-organize, but we don't teach it under that. Now, in theory, a coach might do that, but a lot of it, we have Agile coaches, right? A great lot of them, a high percentage of people who call coaches, just more attention leaders who come and boss people around and stuff and don't really code how to self-organize.
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, it requires a little bit of a skill set, right? I always debated with myself, would it be okay to have, let's say, a bunch of 3-year-olds self-organize? I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if something good would come out of it, right?
Well, they do actually.
Yeah, okay.
You go to a preschool and you put a bunch of 3-year-olds in a room and with a bunch of toys, and they self-organize.
They
They
do.
just,
They do. But what about the goal? Do they have a
and they
shared
don't
goal?
do it very well. Okay, okay, so just about self-organizing. We're talking about self-organizing and doing a good job of it.
That's right, yeah. The book which really influenced my writing myself is The Fieldstone Method. That is the last book I want to just touch on with you a little bit. I have assembled a Fieldstone wall myself, and I would assume you have too, writing that book.
Mm-hmm. I have
There was a
a
lot of,
few.
a few. I did a lot of chiseling. I did a lot of adjustments and getting the fieldstones right. It's not an easy job. How did this analogy of writing, which is extremely helpful, of picking up fieldstones all over the place over a period of time and writing a book out of that? How did that inspire you, and what do you hope in achieving with this book? Because
Okay.
it's so different to your other work.
Okay. Well, here's what happened. See, a number of my books, and maybe the better ones, or at least the better selling ones, started when I was coaching somebody, and at a certain point they said, you know so much about this. Why don't you write a book about it? That's how my consulting book was written. I never thought of writing down all the stuff. I've been coaching consultants for many, many years. Well, I've been coaching writers for a long, long time and writing myself. And you know James Bach, right? You know who James is?
No.
You know, the testing guru.
Yep.
James's father is a famous writer, bestsellers, and James grew up when his father was writing, and sort of what you could expect. His father had a certain style of writing, certain way of working, and so on. And I think James kind of picked that up and thought that's the way he should write. Well, every writer has to find their own way. Okay? And James was not finding his way. He had a very lucrative offer and an advance from a publisher for him to write a book on software testing. And he wasn't doing it. And it was bothering him. He felt he owed them $30,000 that they'd given him, and he hadn't produced a word.
Wow.
And he was really stuck. So I said I would work with him. And he came out here in my living room. We sat for a couple of days. And he asked me, well, how do you write the book? And I explained to him. I thought about it, and the first thing I said was, well, it's like building a fieldstone wall. And he looked at me with this dumb look and he said, what's that? What's a fieldstone wall? But of course he knew what it was, but he didn't know the name. Everybody's seen them. So I explained to him, I went through everything, and he said, well, haven't you written a book about this?
Wow.
So I basically wrote down what we talked about for a couple of days, how I write, and how other variants that other people have used. And so I like that my writing comes out of real experience, not theoretically, books. I mean, would want to be writers who say to me, I'll tell them, why don't you do so-and-so? They're stuck, and they'll say, oh, but I was taught to do it this way, certainly. And I say, well, who taught you that? Well, my English teacher, in high school taught me. And I said, how many books did your English teacher publish? And they go, oh.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if and I'm not saying that people should write books the way I write books. The big message of the book is you got to discover your own way
That's
that
right.
works for you.
Mm.
Some of the things I do might be things that you do, and other things you might do just the opposite.
Yeah.
But it applies also to programming and to software. So you said you built the wall, you did a lot of chiseling, a lot of fitting and so on. And one of the reasons you did that is because you didn't start with a big enough pile of stones.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Right?
yeah.
A different approach is to gather about 3 times as many stones as you need.
Right.
And then when you need one that's just this big, you find it instead of chiseling it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. And which depends on which kind of work you like to do. Right? You know.
Well, it depends on the size of your yard, how much you can,
Yeah. And what your source of stones is. They're very hard to find. The same way with mortaring versus not mortaring walls. A wall that's not mortared at all is going to last a lot longer, assuming it's well built, because mortar is what deteriorates in a wall.
Yeah.
But mortar, you don't have to chip, so you just stick a lot more mortar in there.
Right.
And it's a weaker wall, and maybe it'll only last 4 years instead of 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you don't care.
Yeah.
Right? But
yeah, I did mine without mortar. So it is. Yeah.
Is it still standing?
It's still standing. Yeah. And the beauty of this approach is, and you take it in as an author, let's say, even articles or books, and you see the technique, how it actually applies. But if you really think about it, it's also for requirements work, right? There's also some chiseling going on in the requirements work, and there's some refinement and so we can also pick up field stones and put them in a backlog, and the technique just works very, very well, and it has just shaped the way of how I think in my career. And I just want to thank you for writing the books and exposing them to us. And is there any other book you're working on right now? Is there anything you can share?
I don't like to talk about things I'm working on because I don't know exactly where they're going to go. Mm-hmm. But I am trying something new for me, using the same method, but I'm actually publishing the book incrementally. It's kind of like an agile approach to the book writing. So I'm writing a book on design because I looked and I've been writing this book for 50 years.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
Okay, at least 50 years. And I was going through my stuff in my files and trying to reduce the amount of paper. And I got 3 huge file drawers filled with notes on design. Wow. All right? And that's not doing anybody any good.
No.
Okay?
They need to come out.
How do I reduce this? That's like my piles of field stones, right?
Yeah.
But I've got to go through the reduction process. Wow, that's a big job. That's a big job. So I thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do is do the job, let people watch it happening. And so by publishing online, which is one of the advantages, is I can do that. I can put up a small amount, charge a small amount. People want to look at it. Mm-hmm. And if they buy early, whenever I add something, they get it for nothing.
Yeah.
And then as it gets bigger, the price goes up. And so
yeah. Awesome idea.
I have this book on design, system design, which has got, I don't know, I haven't checked today, 150 pages already. Okay. A lot of people have subscribed to it, and they have said that it's helped them do a better job design. I still have a long way to go. I may not finish it in my lifetime, but on the other hand, in design, we're learning about it's never finished. We're always learning more things.
Always new things.
So the book may never be finished, and that'll be okay.
Well, maybe there will be some incremental release of something. It might not be finished, but maybe some incremental sub-releases or continue with the releases you're currently doing.
Yeah. And I don't know how big it will be eventually.
Right. We'll never know.
if it gets too big, I'll maybe 2 volumes or something.
Yeah.
Because when I wrote about software quality, I started to write a book. It had to break it into 2 books, and I had to break each of those 2 books into 3 books.
Yeah.
And eventually I got 9 books.
Oh. There's always something more. There's always something to discover, to elicit. Well, good luck with all your work. Good luck with all your fieldstones in your drawers, and we're looking forward to those releases. And I want to thank you for spending some time here with me on Agile.FM.
Well, good luck with your broadcast. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you.
I think our industry needs what you're doing very much. Maybe more now than a lot of people don't read anymore.
Well, thank you. Yes, much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.fm. Talk to you soon.